Hello, everyone. This is a thematic course introduction. In other words, just sort of a very general idea of what the course will be like in terms of what we'll be reading. IH, or intellectual heritage, is changing, and its approach generally, and the kind of things that it's reading with students or asking students to read. And you are part of a pilot section of the course where you'll actually be sort of doing the new IH. And the new IH is just sort of different books. So, what books we'll be reading? If you look at the course texts or the syllabus, you'll see that we're reading Borges' Ficciones, or some of it. We're reading Sappho, ancient poet, Octavia Butler's novel, The Parable of the Sower, Oscar Wilde's De Profundis, the long letter and memoir that he wrote while he was in jail towards the end of his life. We'll be reading Saikaku's Comrade Loves of the Samurai, which are little stories written in Japan in the 17th century. The Bhagavad Gita, which is the great Hindu scriptural text from the Hindu tradition. Johanna Hedva's essay in defense of depersons, which is her own account of her own mental illness and its social significance. And then finally, Oscar Wilde again, his great poem, The Ballad of Reading Gaol. And just to get used to it, it's taken me as an American a long time. That last word there, Gaol, is just the British spelling of the word jail. It means the same thing, and it's pronounced the same way. It's just spelled in that different way. So those are the books you'll be reading. Just to let you know, the required text, that is the text they said, well, you've got to teach these, are the Sappho, the Butler, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Hedva. And I added the Borges, both pieces by Oscar Wilde, The Comrade Loves of the Samurai. And yeah, that's what I added. So it's an eclectic, heterogeneous, you might say, collection of texts. The idea of IH is just that we read things together and hopefully read things that are really interesting. And as far as the theme of the course, I would say that's for us to figure out. The list of books that was given to me as a teacher in the required text, I didn't see any particular theme there, just interesting books. And what I decided to do is to add some interesting books of my own choice to the list. So, as far as the theme of the course, I've taught it in this experimental way a couple times before, and the theme is something that emerges, and it doesn't emerge in any sort of preset, preconceived way. It emerges from students reading the text, gathering their ideas about these texts, and then beginning to relate them to each other. So the themes of the course will emerge naturally once we begin to read, and especially once we begin to relate things together that we have read. Um, yeah, these are all really interesting texts. There's no obvious connection uh, between them, but that's something that we will, as a course, and that you will as a student. You'll make sense of it, and it works. It really does. I've done it in this way a couple times now, and it's extremely interesting as a teacher to watch students put things together for themselves, and that's really what I would say the course is about: putting things together for yourself. They are an interesting collection of texts. Jorge Luis Borges, the great Argentine poet and short story writer, personal favorite of mine. If you look at the course schedule, you'll see that we will read a story of his between the other readings. We'll read a story of his first, and then we'll continually return to him. His stories are very, very interesting intellectually. They always have some real interesting philosophical twist to them that makes them extremely interesting to read and may reflect nicely on the other things that we've read. Sappho is an ancient poet from way back, ancient Greek poet, probably from about 2,600 years ago or more, whose work unfortunately exists only in fragmentary form. But we're reading three of her more complete surviving poems. Octavia Butler, who died about 20 years ago, was a very prominent American science fiction novelist. And The Parable of the Sower is kind of a wild science fiction story about a young girl in a dystopian future who starts a new religion, which is very interesting philosophically, I think. Oscar Wilde, the great playwright, poet, writer of the late 19th century, De Profundis is something that he wrote while he was in jail, in Reading Jail, where he had been convicted of sodomy, basically convicted of gay sex, which was still a crime then. And he is actually in jail and spent 2 years in jail in hard labor for sodomy. One of the great tragic stories in English language literature is what happened to Oscar Wilde. Saikaku, I don't know a lot about, except that he was an extremely important Japanese writer in the 1600s to 17th century, and the Comrade Loves of the Samurai are homoerotic themed stories about loves between samurai in the 1600s. The Bhagavad Gita is an incredible text. Everyone should read it, I think. Written about 2,000 to 2,300 years ago. And starts out as the story of a warrior who doesn't want to fight in a war. And is really the conversation that he has with the god Krishna, where Krishna tells him why he should, despite his qualms, he should fight in the war. Hedva's essay is really kind of a wild thing. She has a certain mental disorder, and the essay is her sort of socio-political manifesto, you might say, about what it's like to be mentally ill and how that exposes you to all sorts of, I guess, oppressions and violations. It's really interesting. And then finally, Oscar Wilde's The Ballad of Reading Jail is the last thing he ever wrote after he was released from prison. He wrote a ballad, a long poem, that is about another prisoner that he encountered in the jail, who was a murderer who was sentenced to death and actually hung in the jail, and Wilde's response to that. An amazing poem. You'll see that there are three other things. We'll be watching an Oscar Wilde video. I haven't really decided which one yet. There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff about Oscar Wilde, but that'll be determined. We'll be watching a video about Borges, and we'll be watching a movie discussing, it'll be the reading one day, about samurai. There's a homoerotic tale of the 19th century, actually, between samurai. So obviously the Wilde video is to accompany the readings of Oscar Wilde. The Borges interview is to accompany the short stories we'll read by Borges, and Taboo, the samurai movie, is to go along with the Comrade Loves and the Samurai. So that's really it in terms of the books we'll read. As I said, I can't give you an overarching theme for this course. The interesting thing in these experimental pilot sections has been teaching a course where there is no obvious theme, but watching the themes come together naturally, rather than some canned, preset kind of, not really very substantive idea of a theme. To actually see it emerge from the actual things we read, it's really much more interesting to do it that way. So there'll be another video. It'll be a practical course tour in which I will tell you, how the thing is laid out, how the course is structured, how to use the different things in the Canvas site, and what the requirements for the course are, and things like that. And of course, there will be a syllabus. But this is basically a text-based course. This is what the course is really about, is about these things that we'll read.